Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. Imagine getting fined for parking in your own driveway. Sounds insane, right? But what if I told you the HOA wasn't just after my car? They were after control. When I refused to bow down, they pushed harder, so I pushed back hard. Let's just say their little power trip ended with a giant metal gate and a whole lot of regrets. I had no idea what I was walking into when I bought my house. It was a beautiful home in what seemed like a peaceful, well-kept neighborhood. The kind of place where you imagine friendly waves from neighbors and weekend barbecues. What I didn't realize was that it was also the domain of the most power-hungry HOA president to ever exist. Her name was Karen. And trust me, she lived up to every stereotype. Short blonde bob, permanent scowl, and an unshakable belief that she ruled this community like a queen sitting on a plastic throne. She had an army of minions, other board members who nodded along with whatever ridiculous decree she made. The worst part? They thrived on micromanagement of everyone's lives. It started small. A neighbor warned me during move-in, giving me a knowing glance. "Careful with that," he said, nodding toward my car. I laughed. "What, they don't like Toyotas?" He shook his head. "It's not the car. It's where you park it. If it's not in the garage, Karen's going to have a problem." I thought he was joking. I mean, I own my driveway. It was a part of my property. Surely, I could decide where I park my own vehicle, right? Wrong. A week later, I found a first violation notice taped to my door like a bright red scarlet letter. The offense? Unauthorized vehicle storage in the driveway. That's right, parking my own car in my own driveway was somehow against the HOA's community standards. According to the letter, my car was an eyesore that disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. I thought there had to be some kind of mistake, so I did what any rational homeowner would do. I called the HOA office. Karen answered, her voice dripping with forced politeness. "Oh yes, I was wondering when you'd call," she said. "We received multiple complaints about your vehicle being left outside." "Complaint from who?" "I'm afraid that information is confidential, but rules are rules. You'll need to move it into your garage." I tried to reason with her. My car isn't broken down. It's not covered in graffiti. It's a clean, fully functioning vehicle, and I should be able to park it in my own driveway. Karen chuckled in that smug, condescending way. "I understand your frustration, but I strongly suggest you comply. Otherwise, there will be fines." I hung up, irritated but determined. Surely, this was a misunderstanding. I went straight to the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, looking for the rule she was referencing. And guess what? There was nothing prohibiting parking in driveways. Armed with this information, I attended the next HOA meeting, fully prepared to call Karen out. The room was packed with bored-looking homeowners. Most of them avoided eye contact with Karen as she droned on about flowerbed heights and mailbox uniformity. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up and laid out my case. "The violation you gave me isn't supported by the CC and RS," I said. "There is no rule against parking in my own driveway." Karen didn't even blink. She just smiled, the kind of smile a cat gives before pouncing on a mouse. "Oh, but there's a rule about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics, and your car doesn't meet the standard." I laughed in disbelief. "So you just make up rules as you go?" The other board members immediately nodded along with Karen. "The board has discretionary power to interpret aesthetic violations," one of them said. Translation: they could fine me for literally anything they didn't like. That's when Karen leaned forward, her smile widening. "Since you're refusing to comply, we'll be issuing a $250 fine for noncompliance. And if the car remains in your driveway, it'll be an additional $50 per day." I could feel my blood pressure rising. This is ridiculous. You can't just invent rules and steal people's money. Karen's smile turned downright gleeful. "Oh, but we can. If you don't pay, we'll have legal grounds to place a lien on your house." That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with rational people. This wasn't about neighborhood standards or community harmony. It was about power, and Karen was enjoying every second of it. I went home furious. My first instinct was to lawyer up and fight back, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen wanted to fight. She thrived on dragging people through months of HOA hearings, legal threats, and bureaucracy. That's when it hit me. I wasn't going to fight Karen on her terms. I was going to beat her at her own game. So I went back to the HOA bylaws, looking for any loophole I could use to turn the tables. And that's when I found it, the golden ticket. A tiny section under property modifications stated homeowners had the right to install structures for security purposes as long as they followed city zoning laws. Just like that, an idea was born. If Karen thought my car was an eyesore, I was about to give her something much, much bigger to complain about. The next morning, I made a call to a contractor because if the HOA wanted to fine me for parking in my own driveway, I was going to make sure they'd never even see my driveway again. The moment I hung up with the contractor, I knew there was no turning back. If Karen and her HOA minions wanted to play dirty, I was about to bury them in their own rules. I had one goal: make my property untouchable. And thanks to the HOA's own bylaws, I had the perfect way to do it. I spent the next few days finalizing my plan. First, I made a trip to City Hall and spoke with the zoning department. After a brief but enlightening conversation, I walked out with confirmation that I could indeed install a massive security gate at the entrance of my driveway. As it was within the property line and met height restrictions, the HOA couldn't do a damn thing about it. And Karen, she had no idea what was coming. The morning construction began. The reaction was instant. Within minutes, curtain blinds twitched, doors opened, and a small crowd gathered. It was like I had announced free pizza. Except instead of excitement, the neighborhood was buzzing with confusion and concern. I was standing next to the contractors when I spotted her. Karen marched up my driveway with that stiff, overconfident walk of hers, clipboard in hand, like she was patrolling the streets of some HOA dictatorship. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her tone a mix of outrage and disbelief. I didn't even try to suppress my grin. "Oh, good morning, Karen. Lovely day, isn't it?" She ignored my fake pleasantries and gestured to the large steel post being drilled into the ground. "You did not submit an application for this structure," she hissed. I feigned innocence. "Oh, I didn't have to. This is a security measure, and per Section 4.3 of the HOA bylaws, any modifications made for safety and security are automatically permitted as long as they meet city codes." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She knew I was right, but she wasn't going to back down. "That may be true," she said, regaining her composure. "But this is outrageous. You're putting up a fortress around your driveway. It completely disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the community." I shrugged. That's funny because I don't recall anything in the bylaws about driveway aesthetics, but I do remember something about property security being encouraged. She was fuming, but then she tried a different angle. "This will be an eyesore, and the HOA board will not approve of it." I gave her my best innocent expression. "Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. I thought you hated eyesores. That's why you fined me for my car in the first place, right?" She went silent. Checkmate. The construction continued despite Karen's objections. The gate was a monstrosity, not just a simple fence. It was a 10-foot-tall, custom-built steel gate with solid metal panels that completely blocked the view of my driveway from the street. No one could see in, no one, and I made sure of one thing: it was HOA compliant. Over the next few days, my fortress took shape. Neighbors whispered and watched, some amused, others nervous about Karen's inevitable meltdown. And sure enough, it didn't take long before she struck back. 3 days later, I received another violation notice. Unauthorized structure, immediate removal required. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. Karen was grasping at straws. She couldn't find a legitimate reason to stop my gate, so she just made one up. I took a red pen, circled the violation notice, and wrote in bold letters, "Denied. Please refer to Section 4.3 of your own bylaws." Then I walked right up to the HOA office, taped my response to their door, and strolled away like I was the main character in an action movie. The next day, I got an email from Karen. Subject: immediate HOA meeting. Attendance required. Karen, your recent construction project has raised concerns among the board. We will be discussing this matter at an emergency meeting. Your attendance is required. Oh, I was going. I wouldn't miss it for the world. At the meeting, Karen wasted no time. She opened with a dramatic rant about how my excessive gait was a violation of community spirit and a direct attack on the neighborhood's harmony. She tried to rile up the other homeowners, But it didn't work because, as it turns out, some of my neighbors love the idea. I think it's great, one of them said. I've been wanting to put up a privacy gate too. Yeah, another chimed in. Honestly, I might do the same. Keeps nosy people out. Karen's eyes twitched. You can't seriously think this is acceptable, she hissed. I leaned forward, my tone calm but firm. Karen, everything I did is within the bylaws. The gate is legal and it follows all city codes. You can't fine me. You can't make me take it down. I let that sink in before I delivered the final blow. But you can keep trying to harass me. And if you do, I'll have no choice but to contact my lawyer. And trust me, I'd love to discuss this matter in a courtroom. Silence. Dead silence. Karen realized she lost. One of the other HOA board members, clearly tired of her nonsense, cleared his throat. I think we should table this discussion, he muttered. The meeting ended abruptly. Karen stormed off, defeated, and as I walked out of that HOA office, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Because if Karen couldn't bully me into submission, she was going to try something else, and I was more than ready. I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. After that disastrous HOA meeting, she had been humiliated in front of the entire board. But people like Karen, they don't accept defeat. They scheme, they plot, and they always come back twice as petty. The first sign of retaliation came 2 days later. I woke up to find another bright red violation notice taped to my door. At this point, it was practically tradition. But when I read the fine print, I almost burst out laughing. Noise violation, disturbing the peace with unauthorized construction. Oh, come on. My construction had been done for a week. They were just making stuff up now. I walked right up to the HOA office and slapped the notice on the receptionist's desk. Tell Karen she's really got to be more creative than this. The receptionist looked exhausted. She just sighed. Yeah, I'll let her know. But this was just the beginning. The next day, I got another fine. This time, trash can violation. Apparently, my garbage bin wasn't aligned correctly with the curb. Seriously? They fined me $50 because my trash can was, according to them, not aesthetically pleasing. Then came the grass height complaint, followed by a mysterious complaint about excessive foot traffic in my driveway. By the end of the week, I had received 5 separate violation notices. Rin was throwing everything at me. She knew she couldn't get rid of my gate, but that didn't mean she couldn't harass me into submission. Except here's the thing. I don't break easily. I documented everything, every fine, every letter, every ridiculous complaint. I even set up security cameras and recorded the HOA board members snooping around my property. They were desperate to catch me in some kind of violation. And then Karen made a mistake. A big mistake. One afternoon, I got a knock on my door. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a delivery guy. It was 2 HOA board members, and they weren't just standing at my door. They were inside my front yard. They had trespassed. I stepped outside, my arms crossed. Something I can help you with. One of the men, a scrawny guy in a polo shirt 2 sizes too big, cleared his throat. We're here to conduct an inspection. I raised an eyebrow. An inspection? He nodded. There have been complaints about unauthorized modifications to your property. I stared at them, then very slowly pointed at the big steel gate. Do you see that fence? I asked. They nodded. That means this is private property, and you just admitted you came in here without permission. The scrawny guy turned red. Well, technically, I held up my phone and showed them the live security footage. Trespassing, I said, watching their faces turn pale. Illegal entry, harassment. I paused and smiled. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave right now, or I'll be calling the police. They didn't even argue. They just bolted. And Karen? She got an official cease and desist letter from my lawyer the next morning. Now, I expected that to be the end of it. I figured Karen had finally realized she'd lost. But oh no, she still had one more trick up her sleeve. A few days later, I got a formal letter from the city's zoning department. According to the letter, the HOA had filed a complaint against my gate, claiming it violated city regulations. Karen had officially taken her fight to the government. I read the letter twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. She actually called the city on me. And you know what? I let her dig her own grave. I called the zoning office, scheduled an official inspection, and welcomed the city inspector with a smile and a fresh cup of coffee. The inspector walked around, measured the gate, checked the paperwork, and then he laughed. "This is perfectly legal," he said, shaking his head. "We love to waste our time with these complaints." He even signed a written report confirming my gate was 100% compliant. Karen had fired her last shot, and she had missed completely. That night, I sent a copy of the inspector's report to the entire HOA board. Then, just for fun, I CC'd every single homeowner in the neighborhood. The next morning, I saw Karen outside for the first time in weeks. She was standing at the edge of my driveway, staring at the massive gate like it had personally insulted her ancestors. She saw me and glared. I just waved. "Lovely morning, isn't it?" She turned bright red and stormed off. She knew it. I knew it. She had lost, but the final blow was coming. And when it landed, Karen wouldn't just lose a battle. She was about to lose everything. The morning after Karen's latest failed attempt to take down my gate, I could feel something had shifted. The neighborhood was buzzing. The email I had sent out with the city inspector's report had made waves. People who had previously been too afraid to speak out against the HOA were finally waking up. But I wasn't done yet. Karen might have lost her battle against me, but she was still HOA president, still clinging to power. If I wanted to end this once and for all, I needed to expose her corruption on a much bigger scale. And as it turns out, I wasn't the only one she had screwed over. The first crack appeared when my neighbor Mike came over that afternoon. He was a quiet guy, had been living in the neighborhood for years, and had mostly kept his head down when it came to the HOA. But today, he had a stack of papers in his hands and a look of pure determination. "I saw your email," he said, "and I think it's time someone showed you this." He handed me the papers. They were financial reports, specifically HOA financial records. Karen had been skimming HOA funds for years. There were thousands of dollars in miscellaneous expenses with no explanation, payments for community improvements that never actually happened, and the best part, a $5,000 payment to a contractor for a project that never even existed. Guess whose brother-in-law owned that contracting company? Karen. I let out a low whistle. "This is insane. Where did you get this?" Mike smirked. "I was on the HOA board for a while." Karen always acted like she ran everything, but she was sloppy with the paperwork. "I've been keeping copies for years, just in case." I grinned. "Well, Mike, today is just in case." That night, I sent another email, but this one wasn't just about my gate. This one included all the financial records. I CC'd every single homeowner. I CC'd the entire HOA board. And just for good measure, I CC'd the state HOA fraud investigation office. Then I sat back and waited. The fallout was instant. The next morning, Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting. I didn't even have to show up. Half the neighborhood was already out for blood. By the time I walked into the clubhouse, the room was chaos. Homeowners were shouting, waving copies of my email, demanding answers. Karen was at the front trying to maintain control, but she was sweating. She knew she was cornered. One of the board members, a woman named Linda, slammed a folder onto the table. "This is fraud, Karen. You've been using our dues as your personal piggy bank." Karen shook her head wildly. "It's a misunderstanding. Those payments were all for the community." I stepped forward, holding up a copy of her brother-in-law's fake contract. "So this community project, the one we all paid for, where is it exactly?" Silence. Then Linda stood up. I motioned to remove Karen from the HOA board effective immediately. There was a second motion within seconds. Karen's face went pale. "You can't do this. I am the HOA president." Not anymore. The vote was unanimous. Karen was kicked out on the spot. She tried one last desperate move, threatening lawsuits, screaming about how this was a conspiracy against her, but no one was listening anymore. She had lost her power, her control, everything. And it only got worse for her. 2 weeks later, after an official audit, Karen was formally charged with embezzlement and fraud. She was forced to pay back thousands of dollars in stolen funds, and the final cherry on top, she was banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. But the best part? She was so humiliated that she moved out of the neighborhood entirely. Karen was gone, and my massive, glorious steel gate was still standing. The HOA was restructured, new board members were elected, and the ridiculous fines and rules were gone. As for me, I enjoyed a peaceful HOA-free life, sipping coffee in my driveway with my car parked exactly where it belonged. And every time I looked at my 10-foot steel gate, I smiled because that was the gate that ended Karen's reign. With Karen gone and the HOA in shambles, life in the neighborhood transformed overnight. The fear was gone, the petty fines stopped, and the stupid rules about mailbox colors and trash bin placement were a thing of the past. For the first time since moving in, I could finally enjoy my home without feeling like I was living under some tyrannical regime. But the best part? Watching the HOA scramble to repair the damage Karen had left behind. The new board members, handpicked by the homeowners, immediately started undoing her ridiculous policies. They repealed every arbitrary fine, refunded as much of the stolen money as possible, and even reduced HOA fees since Karen had been padding the budget with fake expenses. The first official announcement from the new HOA president. Going forward, the HOA will be focusing on community well-being, not harassment. It was an entirely different world. But just because Karen was gone didn't mean I was done with my victory lap. Oh no, because just when I thought I'd seen the last of her, she made one final pathetic attempt to save face. One evening, I got a mysterious letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew exactly who it was from. I opened it, and sure enough, there was Karen's name scrawled at the bottom in her usual pretentious handwriting. The message was a half-hearted apology followed by a favor request. I regret how things escalated between us. I was only trying to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood. Perhaps I was overzealous, but I only had the community's best interests at heart. I hope you understand. I snorted out loud. This woman had spent months finding me, harassing me, and trespassing on my property, and now she wanted to play the victim. But the real kicker was the last paragraph. Now that I'm no longer on the HOA board, I hope you'll reconsider keeping that massive gate up. It has become an unfortunate eyesore in an otherwise charming neighborhood. I trust that with me gone, there is no longer a need for such an extreme measure. I had to reread it twice just to believe what I was seeing. Karen, the same woman who had fined me into oblivion for parking in my own driveway, was now asking me to take down my gate because it didn't fit her idea of aesthetic harmony. Oh, the irony. So naturally, I did what any reasonable person would do. I framed the letter right next to my security camera footage of her board members trespassing on my property. Every time I walked past that frame, I smiled because that letter was the last desperate gasp of a fallen tyrant. With Karen gone, the entire neighborhood seemed to come alive. People started talking to each other again. No one was afraid to park their cars in their own driveways. The rigid, oppressive atmosphere had been lifted, and for the first time, the community actually felt like, well, a community. To celebrate, a few neighbors and I decided to throw a massive barbecue. We set up grills, tables, and music in my backyard, invited everyone, and had a real neighborhood gathering, one without HOA threats looming over our heads. Mike, the guy who had given me the HOA financial records, walked up with a beer in hand and chuckled, "So, are you ever going to take down that giant gate?" I smirked, "Nope." He laughed, "Didn't think so." We all toasted to a car-free life and spent the evening swapping horror stories about the worst HOA encounters we'd faced. By the end of the night, we all agreed on one thing. Karen's reign of terror would never be forgotten, and neither would the gate that took her down. The new HOA rules. A month later, they held another meeting, this time actually inviting the homeowners to vote on new policies. For the first time ever, people weren't scared to speak up. The ridiculous aesthetic fines were abolished. The parking restrictions were gone, the garbage bin alignment rule was shredded, and the best part, someone actually proposed an official Karen clause in the HOA bylaws. No board member shall enact or enforce rules based on personal preference or aesthetic taste, nor shall they fine residents for rules not explicitly outlined in the community CC and RS. The motion passed with 98% approval. The only no votes were Karen's old board cronies, but since they had lost all their power, no one cared what they thought anymore. The last laugh. A few months later, Karen officially sold her house and moved out of the neighborhood. It was the final chapter in what had been one of the most ridiculous battles of my life. But before she left, I made sure to leave her a parting gift. A custom-made sign placed right in front of my massive gate in loving memory of HOA President Karen's reign, 2018 to 2023. The neighborhood loved it. Karen, not so much. At that point, she was just a bad memory. As I stood there staring at my massive steel fortress, I realized something. I had won, not just against Karen, but against the whole rotten system that let people like her bully homeowners for years. And that was worth every single fine. With Karen finally out of the picture, life in the neighborhood was peaceful. It was a strange feeling at first. No more ridiculous fines, no more surprise violation notices, no more tense HOA meetings where Karen dictated everyone's lives like a medieval queen. For the first time in years, people actually felt free in their own homes. But while the HOA had been defeated, I knew something about life. There's always one last twist waiting. And it came in the most unexpected way, a new threat on the horizon. One afternoon, I was relaxing on my porch, sipping a cold drink and admiring my glorious, unchallenged steel gate when my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA. At first, my heart skipped a beat. Had they found a way to strike back? Was some new board member trying to revive Karen's reign of terror? But as I opened it, I nearly choked on my drink. Subject: Special Invitation, Homeowner Advisory Committee. Dear homeowner, due to your active participation in past HOA matters, we would like to formally invite you to join the newly established Homeowner Advisory Committee. Your insights and contributions would be valuable in shaping a fair and balanced community for all residents moving forward. Sincerely, the new HOA board. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. They wanted me, the guy who had humiliated their entire board, exposed fraud, and built an HOA-defying fortress, to join them. Oh, this was rich. A tempting offer with a catch. I considered it for a moment. After all, being on the board would guarantee I could keep the HOA in check. No more Karen wannabes rising to power. No more ridiculous policies sneaking their way back into existence. But then I imagined it, sitting in boring meetings, reviewing landscaping requests, debating fence heights. Yeah, no thanks. I drafted my response. Subject: Special Invitation. Dear HOA Board, I appreciate the offer, but I must respectfully decline. I fought too hard for my freedom to turn around and start writing violation notices for overgrown grass. However, I will gladly serve in an honorary role as the community's official HOA watchdog, ready to expose any future nonsense at a moment's notice. Best of luck. P.S. The gate stays. And with that, I close a chapter on my HOA saga. The unexpected visitor. A few days later, just when I thought things had settled, something strange happened. A black SUV pulled up to my house. Not a neighbor, not a delivery truck. When the door opened, a well-dressed man in a suit stepped out holding a briefcase. I immediately thought, oh, great, HOA 2.0, some legal guy trying to scare me into compliance. I walked out to meet him, keeping my posture relaxed. I asked the man, "Can I help you?" He smiled. "You're the one who took down the HOA president, right?" I frowned. "Oh yeah." He reached into his briefcase and handed me a business card. "I represent a group of homeowners who've been dealing with the HOA. We've been following your story, and we think you could help us." I stared at the card. It wasn't just some lawyer. It was a legal firm specializing in lawsuits against abusive HOAs. The guy smirked. "Ever thought about taking your HOA expertise nationwide?" Oh, I felt a slow grin spreading across my face. Maybe my fight with Karen wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was just the beginning. So what do you guys think? Should I take this fight to a bigger stage and start taking down HOA tyrants across the country? Let me know in the comments. And if you love this story of petty HOA revenge, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because trust me, there are way more horror stories out there waiting to be exposed. Until next time, keep your driveways clear, your gates tall, and never let an HOA tell you what to do.